as we call it. My name is Mary Bowling, and I'll be your moderator for today's meeting. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself later, but first I have a few housekeeping items and other introductions. Tonight's webinar is being recorded and will be closed captioned and made available online in about 1 or 2 weeks. So we're going to start that recording. And tonight you'll hear about plans for cleaning up contaminated sediment in the Detroit River through a partnership with those entities represented on the right of the first slide. And we welcome your input on the project. So please enter your questions in the and comments by clicking on the Q&A button on your screen and then type them in the box that appears. We will begin our agenda with introductions, followed by a few presentations about the project, and finish by addressing your questions and having further discussion up to about 8 p.m. if needed. We'll do our best to answer all of the questions entered through the Q&A, but if time runs out, we'll address the remaining questions when we post the webinar recordings. So let's get started with introductions. Tonight, we're very fortunate to have the Honorable Congresswoman Debbie Dingell here to say a few words. So Debbie, would you like to say hello?
Thank you, Mary. Good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you. Someday we're all going to be back in person, and I really look forward to that day. I'm going to be very brief, and I want to thank all of the partners that are participating in this, the Michigan Sea Grant, the EPA, the Corps of Engineers, the Eagle, Bridgestone America Tire Operations, and the Detroit River Public Advisory Council, Friends of the Detroit River. We're here because we care about the riverfront. I'm committed to working with every one of you, the state, the partners that are here today, the administration, so that we can make sure we clean up our riverfront. We're here because we all care about what has happened and how we're going to clean up these sites that have issues and how we work together as a community. My priority is making sure downriver residents and workers and everyone in between are safe and that the environment's protected. This is integral to this community. We need to make sure that the pollution and the degradation of habitats that's currently happening is remedied. I'm committed to working with everyone here to clean up this site and to find the best process to do that. Everyone's going to benefit from this cleanup project. And the more time, energy, and planning that we invest into cleaning up the riverfront, the better all the downriver communities will be. And that's the goal here. We need to work together, not against each other. And I want people to get the facts. There are too many rumors out there, too many things that aren't true. Right now, we're focused on cleaning up along the riverfront. We got to make sure the plan's efficient, will remain effective for years to come, and will include input from all parties. So I think, there's another project up the road. I was meeting with up the river, I should say, not the road. And Wyandotte said to me they felt like they were going to get divorced because of redistricting. I'm not going anywhere. We all are working together. We've made huge progress. We're going to keep doing it. Nobody's made decisions about what's going to happen anywhere, and I'm just going to take this out directly. There are no plans for a port. This isn't to get this done. This is to clean up the river, period. So with that, I'll turn it back to Mary, and I look forward to hearing the presentations and hearing the questions and answers tonight.
So thank you, Congresswoman Dingell. We really do appreciate your support and commitment to making the Detroit River safe for all of us to use. So next up, we have Rose Ellison and Amber Faulkner from the US EPA.
Hi, this is Rose Ellison with US EPA. I'll be speaking a little later, but I'm the project manager, the EPA project manager for the site, one of them.
My name is Amber Faulkner. I'm also part of EPA and also a project manager for several sites within the Detroit River.
Thanks, Rose and Amber. Next, we'll hear from our project partner, Jane Johnson from Bridgestone American Tire Operations, LLC.
Hi, I'm Jane Johnson. I've been working on this project since about 2014, and it's been an amazing trip working with EPA and all of the partners that are on this call. If I start trying to name one of them, I'll mess up. So I won't do that, but I appreciate everybody attending. I look forward to the information that we're going to share and the information that we're going to hear. And we'll be happy to answer any questions you have for me at the end of the meeting today. Thank you. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Jane. In addition to EPA and Bridgestone, who are leading the project, we have representatives here from a few agencies that are providing support on the project. So first up is Paul Powell from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
We're having some technical difficulties getting Paul on, so I'll introduce him and hopefully he'll be joining us soon. But Paul is from the Detroit District Army Corps of Engineers, and he's the actual project manager for the overall project, and the Corps of Engineers will also be doing oversight, which he will be responsible for as well.
Thanks, Paul, or thanks, Rose. Hopefully we'll be able to get the technical difficulties with Paul worked out so that we can hear him later on.
Paul?
So next are Melanie Foose and Sam Nofke with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy.
I guess I'll go first. Hi, my name is Melanie Foose. I work for the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. I'm an Areas of Concern coordinator for the Detroit River, and so I'm working with all of the partners, including the agencies and the Public Advisory Council, on restoring the Detroit River. Thank you.
And Sam?
Yeah, I'm Sam Nofke. I'm a senior aquatic biologist with Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. I focus generally on contaminated sediment statewide, and I work closely with EPA, AOC sediment remediation projects.
Thank you, Melanie and Sam, and for all the project team members that you just got introduced to. We really appreciate all of you coming together tonight to share your contributions to this cleanup effort. The final introduction is for me, actually, on behalf of the Detroit River Area Public Advisory Council. Again, my name's Mary Bowling. I'm an educator with the Michigan Sea Grant program at MSU Extension, and I serve as the chair for the Detroit River Public Advisory Council. But I do also want to recognize Bob Burns, who is on the line tonight. Bob is the river keeper for Friends of the Detroit River and vice chair of my Public Advisory Council. So the council is a way for us to get the public involved. So we're very happy to be hosting this meeting tonight for all the public who wishes to hear about the project, what's going on, what's planned, and be able to express your questions and get things out into the open. And if after tonight's meeting, you would like to join or learn more about the council, please visit the Friends of the Detroit River website at detroitriver.org. We're going to go ahead and post the links to the detroitriver.org as well as other items in the Q&A and the chat as they come up tonight. And then that way you'll be able to just click on those in the webinar rather than having to write them down very quickly. So now let's get started with tonight's presentations. So if we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background about the area of concern. So next slide. The Detroit River has had a varied industrial history, from sawmills and shipbuilding to steel mills and chemical manufacturing and everything in between here on this slide. So the Detroit River has been a gathering place for centuries, but we haven't always treated it with the respect it deserves. And our proud heritage in the region includes being the heart of the Industrial Revolution and the arsenal of democracy, but our waterways have sometimes suffered as a result of this progress. Next. So at one time, it was common practice to discharge unwanted materials and waste directly into surface waters. In this photo from around 1965, discharges can be seen going directly into the Detroit River in Wyandotte. Next. Here's another example from 1965 at the McLeod Steel Mill in Trenton. But these aren't isolated incidents. Next. Discharges occurred up and down the river, the Rouge River, and other Great Lakes waters. Chemicals like PCBs, PAHs, arsenic, and others listed here were sent into our rivers and lakes and eventually settled into the sediment or mud at the bottom of the rivers. As a result of those chemicals, habitat loss, and other issues, 43 Great Lakes areas of concern were identified and designated in the US-Canadian Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement of 1987. Next. The Detroit River was one of those designated sites. The AOC covers the entire length and breadth of the river from its origin at Lake St. Clair to where it empties into Lake Erie. Once it was designated, work began in Canada and the US to create plans for cleaning up the river with the ultimate goal of having it be fishable, swimmable, and drinkable. Next. On the US side, there were 11 problems, or what we call beneficial use impairments, that were identified for the river. 2 of these have been removed, but we're still working on the remaining 9. The diagram on the right shows that 6 of the remaining 9 sites or problems are directly related to contaminated sediments. Because the discharges happen all along the Detroit River, it would take billions of dollars and many decades to clean it all up. So we need to be strategic. Next. Since that original designation in 1987, a lot of work has gone into figuring out exactly where the worst of the worst areas of contamination are. This map takes all of that research and shows us where the hottest spots are in the river. So places like the Detroit Riverfront and the Trenton Channel, you can see here in red, dark red, they contain the highest concentrations and possibly the most combination of chemicals than other parts of the river. So this is where we need to focus first. So tonight we're here to talk about a cleanup plan for the Manguagan Creek and Upper Trenton Channel. A very similar project was completed not too long ago. Next slide. For the Black Lagoon in Trenton, the EPA led that effort with support from the PAC and Friends of the Detroit River and other partners. We are happy to support them in this Makutsi effort, and Rose Ellison, who you heard in the introductions, is going to share more about that project now. Next. Rose, do you want to start your presentation?
Thanks, Mary. As I said before, I'm Rose Ellison. I'm with the US EPA Great Lakes National Program Office, and I'm one of the project managers on this project. And I also am responsible for the Detroit River area of concern. Before I get started on my remarks, I want to, what I'm going to go over is a little bit of the project background, kind of explain this project in context of other things going on in the Trenton Channel, and then the outcomes that we have for the projected outcomes for the project. But I do want to say, and I think when I'm done, hopefully it'll be clear because the questions have already come up and I've heard about it before. This has nothing to do with any development onshore. We are focused completely on remediating the sediments and, as Mary said, reestablishing the beneficial use of the Detroit River. So everything that we're doing, this project is specifically a cleanup project, and hopefully by the time I'm done, it might be a little bit more clear where our focus is for this. So I just want to quickly say that the Great Lakes National Program Office is one of only 3 regional in EPA, 3 regional programs in the country. The other one is the Everglades, and the third is the Chesapeake Bay program. So our entire focus and mission is specifically the Great Lakes. Our headquarters is we are located in Chicago. Our headquarters actually is out of Washington, D.C., but I am located locally. I'm here. I'm a resident of Grosse Ile. So I know what I'm talking about when we're talking about this area and the problems. Our program, the Great Lakes National Program Office, I think a lot of you have heard of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And that is the cleanup, the money going toward this project, or we're getting the money from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And that is it's a $1 billion program now for cleanup of contaminated sediments and habitat and restoration of Great Lakes coastal wetlands and emerging contaminants. It's a pretty broad program. If anybody's interested, you can look it up under the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, but it's our program that administers that on behalf of the federal government and the other federal agencies that work under the GLRI as well. The program that we're doing the cleanup under is called the Great Lakes Legacy Act. It's a non-enforcement partnership agreement with a non-federal sponsor to clean up contaminated sediments, which are the sediments are the basis of the Great Lakes food chain. That's why we're so concerned about them. And we don't want contaminants at the base of the food chain. So we, the program, the cleanup program is called the Legacy Act, and it's a voluntary program. So we may know where we have problems, but we need a partner to step forward in order to undertake the project. And in this case, Bridgestone agreed to be our non-federal sponsor to examine and come up with cleanup options and clean up the McGuagan Creek site. I also want to mention the Corps of Engineers. They're working with us on project management, all the construction work, and project oversight. So the Corps of Engineers has been a great partner, and they have the construction management experience. EPA and our partners have the environmental experience. All right, so I'm going to just quickly go through the rest of my slides. A little bit of the background of this project. So it's the mouth of McGuagan Creek that's the subject of cleanup, what's in this yellow polygon, and then the associated downstream impact area from past discharges in McGuagan Creek. We've been looking at this area for many years, and in 1997, the state did conduct a cleanup of McGuagan Creek. And I just want to say that the reason it's so, we're so specific about McGuagan in this case is because there was an outfall when the Adochem plant was operating. For many years, their main outfall was on McGuagan. So the creek took a lot of industrial discharge. So anyway, there was a cleanup by the state in 1997, and it was pretty complete, but they did not clean up the mouth because of the underwater utilities in the area, and just as an overabundance of caution, did not want to risk hitting any water mains or any utilities in that area. So they did not do the lower stretch. They did not dredge the lower mouth of McGuagan in the 1997 cleanup. Knowing that history, the EPA and the state was part of a larger effort to understand the sediments in the Detroit River, conducted a survey of contaminated sediments from the Toll Bridge down to Celeron Island in 2014, and went back and took a look at the mouth of McGuagan to see what condition it was in at that time. And the contaminants in that area were enough to warrant a closer look and a deeper investigation for potential cleanup. That's when Bridgestone came in and said, yes, we will partner with you to take a look at this and do what's necessary to clean it up. So in 2016, there was a intensive remedial investigation. So that means that, for a remedial investigation is to look at the nature and extent of the contamination. And then what follows, once we understand that, go into what's called a feasibility study. And that looks at different cleanup options. We know what the problem is, how do we deal with it? And that you will hear more about the feasibility study directly after I speak from Bridgestone's representative. Okay, so one of the things, this is a little bit of a complicated slide, but I'm sorry, next slide. This is a little complicated, but I wanted to throw it up here because it is really confusing. There's a lot going on in the Trenton Channel right now. In the white polygon is the Upper Trenton Channel project, and that's being managed by one of my colleagues. That's going to be a huge sediment cleanup project involving 200,000 cubic yards of contaminated sediments. And that project's been underway for a very long time. We're right at the point where we're looking for, we're waiting for a proposal for cleanup. The cleanup design has been designed or is almost final. And we're waiting for our partners, and in this case, led by BASF and Union Carbide, among others, for a proposal for the cleanup action. That's the white polygon. The blue polygon is the state Trenton Rail, the upland cleanup under state order, consent order with the Trenton Railroad. That does not involve sediments. That there's no sediments really off the shore of that property there for probably hydrodynamic reasons. We suspected that and confirmed that recently, that there's very, very little sedimentation there. But below that is the McLeod Superfund site. And that does include contaminated sediments. It's unusual that we were able to get sediments included into a Superfund site. In this case, we were able to. So, the ARC project, the McGuagan Creek project, is in yellow, and it's that tiny little, what I call kind of no man's land between the two big projects. This area has a complicated and long industrial history, has a complicated pollutant history. The different areas, we were finding different pollutions from different sources, which are all those little boxes, old industrial outfalls. And the cleanup is complicated. So part of our job is to make sure that no one entity can come in and say, we're going to clean all this up. We can, this is 6 miles of river. It takes a lot of different programs and a lot of different authorities to do that. Part of our job, my job, is to knit those projects together so we get a comprehensive cleanup. And our project, the McGuagan Creek project we're talking about today, is kind of like, it's that gap between the two really large projects. Next slide. The projected outcomes for the project, number one, is to get the contaminated sediments out of the Detroit River. We're going to talk a little bit about that as we go forward, more in depth on what's happening and what's going to happen. But that's the first and foremost importance because it's basis of the food chain. As a result of that, we're going to get short and long-term reduction in risk to human health and the environment. As Mary mentioned, this is a target project for one of the target projects for the overall cleanup of the Detroit River sediments. So that will go into this, support the restoration of the beneficial use impairments in the Detroit River, and then of course to improve habitat. Once we get contaminated sediments out of these areas of concern, we see habitat improvement a lot, or pretty quickly. And I just want to mention, at one point in time, the Hennepin Marsh project was part of this project, but we spun that off as a whole and separate habitat project in and of itself, which is underway right now, I'm glad to say. So with that, I would like to pass this on to Miranda, who is going to talk about some of the study, the community involvement plan and the feasibility study.
Thanks, Roseanne. My name is Miranda Henning, and I'm a scientist at the environmental consulting firm Integral. In general, the work that I do involves characterizing the nature and extent of chemicals in historical industrial sites and waterways, and then evaluating the likelihood that those chemicals could harm human health or the environment, figuring out what's necessary in order to make things safe, and then identifying the best way to clean it up the most effective way. So several years back, Jane Johnson gave me a call and invited me to help direct this voluntary project that Bridgestone was contemplating supporting. And since then, I've been working with Jane and representatives of EPA, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and their consultants. I'm going to be describing 2 of several phases of work that have been completed. And after that, a representative of the U.S. Army Corps will describe other phases of work. If you have questions, do enter them in the Q&A. We will be answering questions after all of the presenters have spoken. And as Mary noted at the beginning, the recording of this meeting is going to be posted on the Friends of Detroit River website within a few weeks. But if you'd like to make immediate copies of any of my slides, feel free to take a screenshot. You do that by using Control and print screen keys at the same time. And then you would use Control V, that's V as in Victor, to paste to your desktop or the Word file. I'm going to be showing you some links to websites, and those are things that I think you might want to copy down. So to start off, let's focus on exactly which parts of Trenton Channel are included in the MCUTC site. Go ahead to the next slide. So we've got two maps here. MCUTC is our acronym for Mungwagon Creek Upper Trenton Channel, and it includes 1,700 feet of Mungwagon Creek and about 50 acres of the Trenton Channel on both the east and the west sides of the navigation channel. The navigation channel itself is not part of the site, and we're just downstream of the toll bridge, which is the more northerly bridge to Grosse Ile. So as you can see from these two maps, with the exception of the wetlands on the east side adjacent to Grosse Ile, the land surrounding the site is largely industrialized. Mungwagon Creek in particular has been influenced by a long history of development, some of which Rose described. It's also been channelized and culverted, and it's influenced by Huntington Drain, which conveys untreated stormwater runoff from surrounding streets and industrial properties that goes directly into Mungwagon Creek. There is some natural shoreline present, especially on the east side, but much of the shoreline along our study area is made up of concrete and rock fill and sheet piling. Now, before we discuss how we intend to improve the environmental conditions of the MCUTC site, I'm going to describe how we hope to involve you, the public. Go ahead to the next slide. The community is really big and really diverse. And included within the community, we have the federal and non-federal sponsors, so that's EPA and Bridgestone, respectively. In addition, there are important project stakeholders that include the people who live, work, and play in the area, various federal, state, and provincial agencies, because of course, this is a binational area of concern, nonprofit organizations, and private companies. And we really welcome involvement, questions, and ideas from representatives from any of these groups and any other people who might be interested. Go ahead. So this is the slide you might want to do a screenshot of. We've thought through a variety of activities, like this meeting that we are participating in right now, that we want to do in order to do two things, both to provide you with information and to give you several different ways of having your views heard. So I encourage you to take a screenshot of this page so that you can have easy access to the websites later. I think Kaylee is also going to be putting the link into the chat as well. So the plan itself is posted at the Friends of the Detroit River website. Do go to the Get Involved tab, PAC project documents, to get to this, the community involvement plan, and several other important documents as well. And the purpose of the community involvement plan is to give you accurate and clear information about the project and also to describe related activities. In addition to this meeting, an activity that just launched literally today is an online survey. So this survey link gets you to an online survey of about 10 or 15 questions that shouldn't take you more than, say, 5 or 10 minutes to complete, that is really geared to hearing your views of the MCUTC site. You can also provide feedback directly to Amber Faulkner at her email address that's right there, or ask for questions. And then information reports are posted on both the Friends of the Detroit River website and EPA's Great Lakes AOC Detroit River AOC website. You will see there are also fact sheets, and one fact sheet about much of the information that we're presenting here just went live within the past day or so. So go ahead and we will discuss the feasibility study. So the feasibility study, or the FS, is one of the key tasks that's required before any site can be cleaned up. And as the name suggests, it's a study of what methods of cleaning up are going to be feasible and effective. It's a process, a 5-step process that starts by defining what success looks like. So we specify individual metrics that we are striving for by cleaning up the sediment. We then look at the full universe of potential methods, and we screen out any that are clearly going to be ineffective. From there, we developed 4 different options for cleaning up the site. And we also consider the no action alternative, not because anybody's contemplating no action, but because it provides us a benchmark for comparison to the other 4 options. Those 4 options then get evaluated in detail so that we can then recommend the best approach. Go ahead. I talked about metrics of success. The formal term for that is remedial action objectives, or RAOs, and these really answer the why question. And there are some RAOs, those listed on the left side of the slide, which are automatically adopted for all areas of concern under the Great Lakes Legacy Act. And then we've added a few extras on the right side, which we identified specifically for the MCUC project. Rose talked about these objectives as well. The most important is really reducing risks to human health and the environment, and then also managing the potential for contaminated sediment to be eroded and potentially transported downstream. Go ahead. So within the overall study area, we first carefully evaluated all of the data that's been collected so far about what chemicals are present in the mud, in the sediment, and at what concentration, so that we could define the footprint of contamination, where we wanted to clean up, both in terms of area and volume. So on the map on the right here, the purple and white areas on the figure illustrate the area with sediment that has high levels of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. PAHs can occur naturally in the environment, but when they're present at levels like these, they're more often associated with coal, oil, and gas production and burning. PAHs are not the only chemical present in the mud, but everywhere they occur, the others are also present. So the PAHs really dictate the cleanup footprint. From that, we've named 2 areas of interest that warrant cleaning up. These are AOI, or Area of Interest C and D. So AOI-C represents about an acre at the mouth of Mungwagon Creek, and AOI-D is about 2 acres in size, and it goes along the western shore of Trenton Channel, just south of Mungwagon Creek. We then evaluated 4 different ways of cleaning up the sediment, plus the no action alternative. Those 4 active options, 2, 3, 4, and 5 at the lower left of the slide, are various combinations of thin cover, capping, and dredging. So a thin cover, as the name suggests, is about 6 to 12 inches of material, usually sand is used, it's clean, and it's not meant to create a barrier. It's not meant to isolate the contamination, but rather to provide a clean surface of suitable habitat for the invertebrates, the worms and clams and insect larvae to live in. A cap is intended to be a barrier. It's usually built out of several different layers of material, and it's reinforced so it will not erode or mix with the underlying contaminated material. And then dredging is essentially removal of the sediment. There are various ways of doing the dredging, but ultimately the sediment is removed and transported to a disposal facility. So we're going to next look at those 4 active methods. If you go to the next slide, you can see the way we look at them, the basis for comparing the options. The first characteristic, protection of human health and the environment, is treated as a threshold criteria, which means that if the option didn't accomplish that goal, we look no further. The other 5 criteria are treated as balancing criteria. So they influence decision-making, but they do not dictate it. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory, but a few probably warrant further description. Long-term effectiveness and permanence is evaluated based on the relative ability of the method to ensure long-term protection of human health and the environment. It's also judged based on the method's proven reliability at other similar sites. Short-term effectiveness, number 4, in contrast, focuses on the option's ability to achieve the goals within a reasonable timeframe, and also to protect against short-term risks during the project's completion. So here we think about the potential for the cleanup project itself to cause difficulty for the people who live, work, and play in the area, such as through, say, increased noise or traffic. Implementability is the feasibility of successfully completing the cleanup project. So in other words, the ability to construct, operate, maintain, and monitor the cleanup work. It also reflects the availability of the needed equipment and workers and services, and the ability to get federal and state permits to do the cleanup work. And finally, cost reflects the cost to design the project, but also to complete it, and then also to do any monitoring that would be required afterwards. So in this case, the cost of cleanup of contaminated sediment under this program will be shared by EPA and Bridgestone. Go ahead. So based on those 6 criteria, we then weighed the pros and cons of the 4 active cleanup approaches and no action. So the obvious advantage of no action is it has no cost, but the obvious disadvantage is that it's not protective of human health and the environment. It doesn't achieve the goals. It's off the table. The second option, which is a thin cover in AOIC and a cap in AOID, is the least expensive of the active cleanup options, and it's straightforward to implement. But because AOID is in an area where the slope of the channel is very steep and the currents are really strong, capping can present some real difficulties there. The third option, thin cover in AOIC and dredging in AOID, has the advantage of the effectiveness over the long term of dredging AOID, and also that given the steep slopes and strong currents in AOID, dredging poses much fewer technical challenges compared to capping. A disadvantage of the third option is that the thin cover in AOIC could erode during high flow events. The fourth option is dredging in AOIC and capping in AOID. Dredging in AOIC will be effective over the long term, and will also reduce the risk of downstream transport. But as I previously spoke about, relative to option 2, capping some portions of AOID is going to be difficult because of the steep slopes and strong currents. And then the final option is dredging both areas. Dredging will be effective over the long term and reduce risk of downstream transport. It's also much more feasible in AOID compared to capping, given the strong currents and steep slopes. As disadvantages go, it is the most expensive. And Rose had mentioned the water lines that had limited dredging back when Mungwagon Creek was previously remediated. We've investigated those water lines further, and they are actually inactive. So they've been cut and capped. There is still obviously an active water line between the mainland and Grosse Ile, but that's on the north side of the bridge. So the water lines that interfered with dredging previously have been confirmed as inactive, and they would need to be removed to do the dredging. Go ahead. So this is a blow up of one of the images that Rose showed earlier, and it illustrates what we currently expect for procedures for the cleanup project. This is, of course, subject to adjustment as we work through the engineering design later this year and into the following year. So first, the 2 yellow areas will be dredged, probably using an environmental clamshell dredge that will be on a barge on the water, and that would remove the sediment and place it directly onto another barge. So that would include 2,200 cubic yards of sediment removed from AOIC and 37,000 cubic yards from AOID for a total of about 40,000 cubic yards. So the dredged material then would be transported by barge about 10 miles south down the Trenton Channel to the existing Point Moulet confined disposal facility, provided, this is a big if, provided we're granted permission to use it. So the Army Corps of Engineers is already using it for disposal of material that's dredged for navigational purposes. And we are currently investigating whether we will get permission to use it for this purpose. If we do, it's going to mean that the dredged material never has to be transported on roads, which would be a really good benefit. It means there would not be increased traffic and there wouldn't be risk of spills due to traffic accidents either. So after dredging, the dredged area will be covered with 6 to 12 inches of clean material. That's going to help reduce erosion and also provide good habitat for these benthic organisms, the invertebrates that live on the bottom of the river. And after cleanup is complete, sediment adjacent to the dredge footprint, shown here with the white cross hatching, may be monitored. And there are some improvements that will be made to the habitat that I'm going to describe in the next slide. Go ahead. So there are two elements of recommended habitat improvement. In AOIC, we will select backfill, that's the clean material that's placed over the dredged area after dredging is complete. We're going to choose the size of the backfill so that it's suitable for benthic invertebrate habitat for the bugs and worms and bivalves that live in the sediment. In addition, we will look to make improvements to the banks by reducing slopes and hardscaping and add woody debris to Mungwagon Creek for fish habitat. In AOID, the backfill will be sized to be suitable for sturgeon spawning habitat. And that's actually what that photo is that we're looking at the bottom of this slide. Those are sturgeon. And you can see that they really prefer very large cobble for spawning. That's great because it's also the size that we would need in order to manage erosion potential. And with that, I am going to turn things over to Paul Powell. Hopefully he has worked out the technical difficulties and he'll describe other elements of the work that have been completed to get ready for the cleanup. Thanks.
Thanks, Miranda. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that sounds good. Thank you.
Excellent. Good evening. Paul Powell, Project Manager with Detroit District Army Corps of Engineers. And I'll be going over our involvement over the last 3 years with the EPA on the McCutesea project. We've been providing technical assistance to the EPA during the pre-design investigation. And I'll go over some of the tasks that we've completed. We started out with a data gap evaluation. This evaluation utilized existing data and the focused feasibility study to determine the extent and volume of sediment contamination. The results of the evaluation are used to identify additional data that may be required and provide recommendations on how to collect that data. So as a result of this evaluation, additional data collection was required in order to complete what we call the PDI, pre-design investigation phase. So coming out of the data gap evaluation, we conducted some field sampling and analysis. We've collected the sediment samples, and those are analyzed at a laboratory to determine chemical types and amounts. We've collected the samples, and they're currently at the lab being analyzed. When that analysis is complete, a site sampling technical memorandum with a preliminary assessment of the data will be produced. We also did a geotechnical investigation. This investigation involves sampling of the sediment and underlying clay, and that helps us identify and quantify the physical characteristics of the soil, the bearing capacity, compressibility of the sediment. and evaluate the slope stability impacts associated with the proposed solution. Analysis of those samples is also underway. We did a sediment thickness evaluation. So the thickness of the contaminated sediment in the footprint areas was determined. The thickness and location of the sediment will be used to determine the volume of contaminated sediment for removal. The volume and chemical composition will assist in determining the method of disposal. We've done a bathymetric survey. This survey helps us map out the shapes and the depths of the underwater terrain, kind of illustrates the land that lies below that you can't see. This survey incorporated side scan sonar and magnetometer technology. And if you can see the screen, that image there comes from the magnetometer survey. We also did a topographic survey. This survey provides continuous land and water elevation data up the riverbanks and onto the upland along the shoreline. That survey was done using light detection and ranging technology, or LiDAR, and it basically uses a laser to determine the elevation of the features out there. We also did a structure survey, and that was conducted to evaluate and document the condition and location of all the structures along the shoreline, adjacent to or within the project area. So we get a nice, accurate map of where all the outfalls are, things of that nature. We also did a utility survey, and that was for locating and mapping all the crossings, outfalls, utilities above and below ground that connect to or across the channel. And then also that, that leads us to, like Miranda was saying, about utilities that need to be avoided potentially. And then we are also doing hydrographic and sediment transport modeling. So this modeling utilizes the bathymetric survey data to assist in characterizing the extent, volume, and movement of sediment in the project area based on the river flow, with water surface elevation, rates of sediment deposit, and other factors. So upon completion of our PDI phase, a draft pre-remedial design data summary report will be completed, and that report will be comprised of all the individual tech reports or memos from all the tasks that I just talked about. And then we use all this data and analysis to inform the follow-on design phase. So for future or for timeline and future actions, it's important that all these dates are tentative at this time. Things can come up. Can take a while to get these processes done. We've got a lot of work yet to do. We're looking to complete the PDI phase in summer of 2022. Then in the fall of 2022, should be able to start the remedial design phase. That will take about a year into 2023 fall. Then we'll have to get the project permitted and do some property access coordination. Figure maybe from end of design till maybe spring of 2024. And then funding dependent, we could be looking at construction in summer of 2024. And I think, Rose, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you, Paul. We are going to go through some questions and answers, but I just wanted to say, can you go back to Paul's last slide? This is like an output of some of the data that we get, and it's really interesting. The orange part is actually kind of what the bottom of the river looks like. The deeper, where there's a deeper area of like a darker color black, that's probably like scour from ships that used to go into the port there where the sheet pile wall is, where you see the green lighting up, that's that's metal. So you can clearly see the bridge, you can clearly see the sheet pile wall. Then there's other just metallic objects down there. So I always I thought this image was interesting because it's just it's an overlay of two different types of survey, but it's a kind of level of data that we need to collect to conduct these project designs and cleanups. So I just wanted to just mention that image because it is interesting, and you can kind of see what was going on the previous or what happened in the past on some of these areas, like you can see the scour from the ships. We have a list of we have a few questions that were submitted during the presentations. So I am going to go over those and hand them out to the relevant folks. It looks like there's a couple of them that would be in my corner. And since I'm speaking, I think I'm going to just go ahead and answer those. Again, there was a specific question about, can we confirm that the cleanup has nothing to do with the current property owner and future industrial development? The cleanup is, as you can tell from the presentations, we're completely focused on the water and the sediments. What happens upland is not our preview. We're only concerned about what happens upland to the extent that it might impact our project. So we don't want slopes failing. We don't want other contaminant sources. So we are completely focused on the cleanup, and what's ever happening upland is a completely different a completely different project for someone. So I can confirm that we are not working with the Maroons. We are focused on getting the contamination out of the sediments. So the next question was about it was kind of a general kind of a question about the economic outcomes, and basically how does this help? How do we quantify these changes? And that's a really good question. And we actually there's been a couple really good some good research out of the University of Illinois in particular about the economic resurgence in areas of the Great Lakes, particularly urban areas where sediments have been cleaned up. Where there's an area where previously it just was not very pleasant to be down by the river. Now there's floating docks and bars and a lot of recreational activity. So for this project, just to completely be frank, we're not going to probably see a big bounce economically from this project, because as I was trying to illustrate before, it's kind of a piece of a larger puzzle. So, but if we're cleaning up upstream and we're cleaning up downstream, we don't want we want a complete cleanup so that we do get kind of an overall or we will get an overall positive outcome. We don't want any nagging sources of contamination in the areas that we're, in between areas we're cleaning up. So for this project, I don't know if we're going to see really much of an economic bounce, but it is part of the larger puzzle, which the Trenton Channel, the entire Trenton Channel project, I'm talking about from BASF Northworks down to, Elizabeth Park Canals is the stretch that we're looking at. All those projects I was showing you covering. And so we should see, big economic gains. Where we usually see it, probably the first is maybe in fish production. If we're putting in habitat projects or we're cleaning up sediments, we'll see fish starting to move into areas that they're not inhabiting currently. So I hope that answers the question. There was another question about, and I'm not sure I caught Miranda's slide, but it was about ESBTUs and PAH maps for the Upper Trenton Channel. And they were asking, do we have those maps for the Upper Trenton Channel? So for the area above the toll bridge. And we don't, for a number of reasons. Actually using ESBTUs and the ESBTU approach wasn't really well developed when they actually started the Upper Trenton Channel project. That project's been around for a while. And also different projects use different tools for different reasons. And for the McGuagan Creek project, the toxicity calculation was kind of the most expeditious way to go. I believe, but don't quote me on this, for the Upper Trenton Channel project, I think they actually did biological studies. So ESBTU is another way to look at the biological impacts. It's a calculation, but there's other tools and to do that. And so they use some other different tools on the Upper Trenton Channel project. Okay, well, but all these are coming to me. So I have the next question was about the people, the toll bridge, the Grosse Ile Bridge Company, have they been asked to contribute to funding? At some point when the bridge was closed, I heard they were earning $1 million a month. They could afford to help. No, we've been not to contribute to the cleanup at this point. We have been trying to engage them. We are going to need property access from them to clean up the sediments, as well as the Trenton Railroad property. We're going to need property access to allow us to do the work. But we have not had, the bridge company was invited onto this call, so hopefully they might be on it. But we have been trying to engage the bridge company in the project. Just right now, our sole partner is Bridgestone. Next question is, it was earlier you showed a picture of a site that was worked on. Is it complete? Was it successful? What methods were used? I'm not sure, you might be referring to the Black Lagoon site. That was the picture that Mary showed with the barges in the water and kind of a dark looking area. The Black Lagoon is Elias Cove now, over in Trenton. And so I believe that was what you were referring to. And yes, it was cleaned up. It was the very first Great Lakes Legacy Act project in ever. And that was cleaned up. I can't remember, in the early 2000s, I believe, that it was cleaned up. The other project, I showed some polygons, the white one and the red one for McLeod Steel and Upper Trenton Channel. If you were referring to those are in various stages of remediation design, or for McLeod Steel, they haven't kicked off the investigations yet, but they're preparing to. In the case of Upper Trenton Channel, they are they're working on trying to get an agreement for cleanup. So that's toward the end of that one is toward the later stages of cleanup. The methods that were used, if you're talking about Black Lagoon, was dredging. It was mechanical dredging. Got another question. There's a couple questions for Paul and Miranda. I'm going to kick them over to you, but some of them are coming in, so I'm just trying to knock off the ones for me. It was mentioned that there are several similar projects in the area in various stages of progress. Is there a sequencing to the project so that the recently completed projects do not receive contamination from upstream sites? Really interesting question, very practical question. Interesting thing we found on the Detroit River, though, is that the contamination that we're finding in the river that caused us to focus our attention on these sites was caused by, and I'm not making these numbers up, these are based on some data we had from the 60s and 70s, discharge amounts in this particular area, let's say that, like on the map that I showed you, probably over like about 1 billion gallons a day of untreated waste for decades caused the contamination that we're finding that's left. Most of it's gone, but what's left is there. So a massive insult to the environment for a long time. So so that's why we can do some projects downstream of other projects, because what we're finding is that the contamination is really closely related to the discharges right off the site. But we do look into make sure that we don't have any upstream sources that might impact a project that we're going to undertake. So that's really important. Part of the McGuagan Creek project is with the Upper Trenton Channel project underway, and that being remediated, it's allowing us to do the downstream McGuagan Creek project. And the other thing to just mention is when we do undertake these projects, there are, as you saw the silt curtain in the Black Lagoon slide, there's protection so that we don't get downward drift of contaminants downstream. Those are permit conditions. So, and we have silt curtains, we have containment boom, we have water quality monitors to ensure that we are not getting released for any kind of major releases from these sites. So that's another reason that we can do kind of this upstream downstream type of cleanups. Not everywhere. We have to take a look at the conditions, like I said, and make sure that we aren't going to recontaminate something we just cleaned up. That's an important part of what we examine when we're doing all these investigations. Okay, and then finally for me, I think, the question is, saw east side of the channel marked as part of the project, but no discussion about any work there. Are we to assume that no work will be done there as part of this project? So initially, that was what we were calling, well, it's actually Hennepin Marsh, South Hennepin Marsh, but we were calling it, and forgive me off the top of my head, my mind just went blank. I think it was
UTC East.
Yeah, okay. That area, number one, contaminants in the sediment were very low there, number one. And so the only thing that would be left for us to do if we included it as part of the site would be some kind of habitat restoration opportunity. However, we also had the opportunity to do the habitat cleanup under another part of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So we just split that off, and it's no longer part of the site because what we would do there is being taken care of under a different part of the restoration initiative. And like I said, it's underway. So happy to say for the folks that live on Grosse Ile, the sediments there were very low. Just in general in the Detroit River, the high level of pollutants in the sediments track very, very closely to the western shoreline of the Detroit River. So we don't find much contamination out very far from the shoreline. It really is a big swath all the way down from Windmill Point, basically all the way down to the Gibraltar canals. It's all pretty much along the shoreline there. So I'm done talking, hopefully, for you guys, and let's move on to Miranda. There was a question, Miranda, about you. You had mentioned that the shoreline was steep, and so that was the question. What's the angle and length of the slope?
Yeah, and I'm not going to try to rely on my memory for numbers to answer that. And instead, we will answer that with numbers that we can verify as accurate after this meeting.
Okay. Next question. If an armored cap is not considered stable or will stay in place, why will backfill for the habitat stay there?
Yeah, and this question is actually related to another question that asked about management of residuals during dredging. So when dredging, there is the potential for bottom material to get stirred up, and we really don't want that material to be transported downstream. So during the engineering design that will be prepared in the coming year or 2 years, best management practices and other design elements will be put into place to manage those residuals. Now, the backfill is actually part of a residual management practice. So to the extent that there are, that there's remaining sediments that the dredge missed, we lay down the backfill in part to manage those and prevent them from being transported downstream. Now, that's different from the cap, which the cap, if we were to implement it, we really would expect it to stay in place and be stable for decades to come. That's different from managing short-term residuals, which basically settle down back to the bottom over time. Let's see, I can read off the questions, Roseanne. You don't.
Go ahead.
necessarily-
Go ahead. Yeah, if you're.
So the next one I see is about the Point Moulet CDF. So it was constructed in 1981 at a cost of $55 million. $55 million. So how is the current condition? Will all of the UTC dredging projects utilize Point Moulet CDF or just McCutcheon? What's the projected closure date of the CDF? I'm not working on the Upper Trenton Channel, but it is my understanding that Point Moulet is not being considered as a disposal place for the rest of the Upper Trenton Channel dredging. Our application to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is only for the 40,000 cubic yards associated with McCutcheon. At the time that we had the initial conversation with Army Corps about potentially using Point Moulet, they confirmed that there's ample capacity remaining to be able to hold that 40,000 cubic yards. And that's related to Richard Micka's next question, which is what is the current capacity? Will trade-off capacity be required for dredge material from the Lake Erie sailing course or the navigation channels on Detroit River? So the details of whether Point Moulet can be used and whether any trade-offs are necessary, that is really at a decision for the U.S. Army Corps to make during the engineering design process. So you're getting a bit ahead of us. And I do expect that we will have public meetings as we are in the engineering design phase, which will be a more appropriate time to answer questions like that.
You know, that's a very specific question too. And I mean, as far as we know, you know, the trade-off, that is a core decision, but at this point, we're just looking at, that's where we're going to take it, and that's into the managed disposal facility. You know, if the Corps is managing any trade-offs, which they haven't really heard about them doing anything like that, is really up to them. But I mean, I don't even really think that's much of a factor in this project at all. I mean, so I don't know if Paul has a capacity to answer that question, but I mean, it's not even part of the conversation. The conversation is, you know, will they accept the material at the CDF? And if they do, that's just where it's going to go and be disposed of. I mean, we don't expect any follow-on or ancillary, you know, actions because of it.
So, Paul, did you want to respond?
I was just going to say, yeah, I don't think right now we're considering any trade-offs. So we're specifically, because of the types of contamination, we're specifically looking at cell 5 at the CDF. And typically, once it's in the CDF, it doesn't leave. Thank you.
So a listener named Steve noted, related to the Jim Francis question, the contaminated material has basically become encapsulated. So it's a comment rather than a question. I will say though that, so we've collected a large number of sediment cores that allow us to look at varying concentrations with depth. And though it is true that the more contaminated sediments are buried, there are still contaminated sediments at the surface. So I would not characterize the current conditions as encapsulated. Brian Webb from the City of Riverview Brownfield Authority, you presented that dredgings will be placed on barges and hauled away via the waterway. Will any of the dredgings be placed on shoreline ground or a container on land? And if so, where? Our hope, if Army Corps grants approval to dispose at Point Moulet, a major benefit of that disposal option is that we will not need to place any dredged materials on land. Let's see, I think the trade-off question has already been answered. By trade-off materials, would clean material now in Point Moulet CDF have to be trucked out before McQC dredge material can be deposited in the CDF? Paul, do you want to answer that?
Sure, yeah, we do not have to truck out any CDF material in order to place the McCutcheon dredge material in cell 5.
And Richard Micka asked, can a moon pool be used to affect clean dredging? Again, that's really a question for the engineering design. So you're several months ahead of us.
But the answer is, yeah, maybe. It's a tool. So, but that's what they're going to be figuring out during the design. But if that's what they find that is appropriate. But if they can do the work, without it, then it's just going to be dependent on Miranda and her team and what's going to be the most appropriate and effective way to do it. I do want to answer. I think the question came up for Paul, but were bioassays performed in sediment characterization, or were the assessments solely based on sediment chemistry? Miranda, actually, do you want to answer that one because you were around during the RI? I can answer.
No, we did
Right.
not do toxicity bioassays. So toxicity of the sediment was estimated using equilibrium partitioning toxicity units, which is based on literature derived understanding of the relationship between the PAHs in sediments that are bioavailable, available to be taken up by the invertebrates, and the concentrations which are typically toxic to them. So it's a conservative approach that was conducted, and the EPA RPM at the time, or project manager at the time, who has since retired, counseled us that the toxicity units would be sufficient for this study rather than bioassays.
Okay, it doesn't look like, I think that's all the questions.
Well, we do have one more that just came in about any insights on City of Riverview and Wayne County road repairs and improvements or pedestrian cycle enhancements to the Jefferson Road and Bridge over the creek in conjunction with this cleanup.
No, no.
I figured the answer was no, but
Yeah.
yeah, but I will say, because I'm involved with Down River Lane Greenways as well, that we are looking at pedestrian and bike improvements along the west side of Jefferson Avenue, in that area around the creek. So, but that's a totally separate project.
So is that the end of the questions, Mary?
I think so. Unless somebody types in, John Collins had asked about the backfill. I know you talked about that a little bit, Miranda, but maybe there's some confusion on what he was referring to. It sounds like he's more thinking about the larger stones for sturgeon restoration habitat. And and if there's a concern about that staying in place, if there was a concern about a cap not staying in place, how will that stay in place versus a cap?
Right. So, and we can actually probably see it on if you go back one slide, right adjacent to the shoreline, there's a less steep gradient area. Can you go back one slide? Yeah, so I think what we're looking at is so north is to the right, right? So this is tilted 90 degrees. So the area between the two dark areas is a less steep area. And that would, yeah, exactly. That would be a reasonable place to, maybe not quite going out into the channel so far, but that would be a reasonable place to use cobble, which is preferred habitat for sturgeon spawning. And it has the additional benefit of resisting erosion. Now, when we were talking about the cap presenting technical challenges for AOID, indeed, there were concerns about it staying in place, in part due to the steepness, but also the actual implementation. So laying down the cap over such a steep gradient and with the current as strong as it is would also be problematic. So it's not just the long-term stability, but the actual implementability of the cap in AOID that led us to favor it to a less than dredging in AOID.
Looks like we have
Yeah,
another
few more
question
questions.
about this. Will the shoreline have to be stabilized?
Well, when we talked about reducing the slope of the shoreline, and that would help with the stabilization. But again, the degree to which stabilization is required is something that will be addressed in the engineering design.
And then what is Bridgestone's interest here? That's another question.
And Jane, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So Bridgestone, we were formerly called Firestone in the past. We had a wheel room facility that's immediately upstream of this location. And we also, the Mugwagon Creek actually ran through our property. So we have a history of being in the area. And we also have, you know, a very close relationship to Detroit and the automotive industry. And, you know, obviously we have offices and we are a community member up in Detroit. And so when we saw this was going on and we saw that this particular area of the Upper Trenton Channel kind of had been left behind, you know, the Upper Trenton Channel project was going on and there were some projects that were going on a little bit further downstream. And there was this patch that was immediately downstream of where our wheel room facility had been. We took a look at it and, you know, found out a little bit more about the Glencoe projects and the Great Lake Legacy Act. And we thought it was a perfect fit. And, you know, we decided to get involved. We take our environmental responsibilities very seriously. And this was just an important project for us to get involved with. And so we're happy to be at the table.
Yeah, and happy to have you. Been great partner. The last question we have is more contaminated material was discovered at the Black Lagoon requiring additional dredging. Are core samples taken? Yes, core samples are taken. And when we do the dredging, and this will be all part of the design, but we'll have a decision tree and a way to, once we do the dredging, we'll do confirmation sampling, and that will, you know, that will involve core sampling as well.
All right, well, thank you, Rose, and thank you everybody for providing your answers and your input on what is happening here in the Detroit River. You know, again, the Public Advisory Council, you know, we've been working on coming up with a plan for, you know, since 1987, when this was first designated as an area of concern, where we've been working on it. Things happen all up and down the river that we don't have any control over. But when we get an opportunity to potentially clean up some of these sites, it's really exciting. And we do have a number of resources available for you. And I see a question came in at the last minute asking about how can you learn more about the project in the future. So we will be posting updates on a number of these websites, including the EPA website and the DetroitRiver.org website. Those are being put in the chat right now, so you can click on those and bookmark them so that you can get to them later. Also, Amber Faulkner, it was listed earlier. She's, somebody that you can email directly with, and Amber's email is there. And Paul Powell from the Army Corps of Engineers as well. But there's lots of ways for you to get involved. I encourage you, if you're interested in these projects, not just this one, but other projects to clean up the Detroit River, please do participate in our Public Advisory Council. We meet once a month and, once every other month. So our next meeting is going to be towards the end of February, early part of March. And you can find out about that by visiting the DetroitRiver.org website. And we really do thank everybody's participation tonight. This isn't going to be the last chance for input on these projects. We have lots of ways of communicating, including a survey. When you exit out of the webinar tonight, a survey button will pop up. And if you can take a few minutes to fill out that survey, like Miranda said, it's 10 or 15 questions, but it's a great way for us to understand your views about this Makutsi project. And we've shared a lot today. You all have asked a lot of questions, but this is one more tool for us to gain further insight into what your wishes are for this site. And the EPA website, I do want to mention, was having some technical difficulties earlier in the day. So it might be fixed now, but if not, just, try back again later. And if you're still having trouble, again, you can get in touch with Amber Faulkner via email there. And one last thing, if you did not register for the webinar today and you want to receive follow-up messages, please send an email to river@detroitriver.org and we'll add you to the list. So when we have the video or the video available from the webinar, we're going to send that survey link out to everybody again, in case there's any problems with it tonight. And, that's a way that you can stay engaged in getting future updates about the project as well. So again, just thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening and have a great week.
Mary?
Yes.
Did Congresswoman Dingell want to provide any closing remarks?
Not necessary, but thank you. I
Okay.
learned a lot. I learn as much as everybody else does. And I just want to thank, I guess I could turn my camera on. I just want to tell everybody, we're so lucky to have so many people who care about this, the Great Lakes and the river and the lands and our natural resources. And I thank everybody who participated tonight. I thank everybody who cares, and together we are cleaning up our Great Lakes and protecting them for generations to come. Thanks.
Thank you. We do appreciate you coming on tonight.
I learned. I'm
That's why
ready,
we're all
but-
here. I learned stuff too, so. All right, everybody, have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody.